approach to your health span. Have you noticed how our healthcare system may not have your best interest in mind? Join Dr. Eckel in this fun and sometimes disturbing exploration of the state of healthcare and what it means for you. Now, here's your host, Dr. Eckel.
Welcome back, everybody. Dr. Greg Eckel, and this is What the Health. And have you noticed sometimes it is a disturbing topic to talk about health? And I have a super treat for you with his recent book launch, Health in Flames, just came out this year. Dr. Vimal George, MD, MS.
Greg?
Oh boy, I think he froze.
I think it did.
All right, let me get him back. Why don't you just start talking about your book for now?
Oh,
Vimal?
okay. Am I on? Okay.
Yeah.
Great. So I'm happy to tell you a little bit, just kind of set up a background here. So as you guys might be aware of, chronic disease is increasing in the US. Now, whether we're looking at rates of obesity, we actually have the highest rates of obesity around the world if you exclude island nations for the most part, or small nations with a population of less than 5 million. So our rate of obesity is increasing as well year over year. And not just obesity, but also rates of diabetes are increasing, high blood pressure, Alzheimer's, major depressive disorder, generalized anxiety disorder. Even colon cancer rates are increasing over time. And so, obviously this is a very concerning matter. And if you look at the United States compared to other health systems, we actually fare worse in terms of, disease of our chronic disease burden, as well as even our life expectancy compared to other developed nations. Not necessarily developing nations, but compared to developed nations. And so obviously that's a real concern. And what I do in the book is I look at the underlying cause of that. And so the book is called Health in Flames, A Doctor's Prescription for Living Beyond Diet and Exercise. And what I point to is, first of all, something that's relatively obvious at one level. That is that, a lot of us are not getting a lot of exercise. And Greg's back on, so I'll let him.
We are back. There's so much energy coming through on this podcast that the interwebs just booted me off. I don't think that has ever happened at over 70 shows, but I am back. And so I want to give you actually a proper introduction because this is such a timely topic and so very important and has such a fresh perspective that we need to get this message out because this gets us out of the literal fire. So you've got Health in Flames, your new book, which you so graciously sent me a copy. I was reading the PDF before the book arrived, and boy, it is right in alignment with the show, what our listeners are expecting to hear here. So let me pull up your intro one more time, because I think I totally froze there. So just some of your background: medical degree, master's degree in healthcare quality and safety management, and experience as the executive quality director of your clinic, and you have a unique and broad understanding of population health. Today's topic is chronic disease is rising in America and worldwide. Why and what we can do about it. So, Dr. George, welcome aboard What the Health.
Thank you so much, Greg. It's a pleasure to be on.
Mm-hmm. Yes, I am so psyched to get you on talking about, the book. It's Health in Flames, A Doctor's Prescription for Living Beyond Diet and Exercise, which, at first glance, you say, well, that's blasphemy, beyond diet and exercise. Yeah. But when you get into this book and into the solutions that you've put together, it makes total sense and is a really refreshing take on what's going on and actually addressing root causes and imbalance. And so, without wanting to, I don't want to give it away, but what is going on with the rise of chronic disease in the United States and really worldwide for that matter? What is happening?
Yeah. So, Greg, I think you rightly point out that chronic disease is increasing, not just in the US, but also worldwide. And as time progresses, a lot of these are actually increasing over time. And at one level, we all know the reason for that. At some level, we know that we're more sedentary than our forefathers. Certainly, those who lived before the Industrial Revolution, they were much more active. We also know that we're eating a lot more unhealthy foods, right? A lot of more processed foods. Our fast-paced lifestyle also is not conducive to good sleep. And so all of these are foundational pillars of good health, whether you're talking about healthy diet, exercise, and good sleep, and then stress management. And what I kind of come to in the book is that, all these things that we're treating as chronic diseases, whether it's diabetes, high blood pressure, major depressive disorder, anxiety, in a sense, they're really symptoms of a different underlying disease that is the ultimate cause, the root cause of what's contributing to all of our ailments. And just as you would not treat a pneumonia with cough medicines, right? You can't just treat the symptoms. You can't just treat it with cough medicines or fever-reducing medicines. You can't just treat it with, Tylenol. You have to treat the underlying cause. In the same way, unless we direct our efforts at the underlying cause of what's causing all these various chronic diseases, we're not going to get to a proper solution. So on that note, really the underlying cause that I identify in the book and that I make the case for is that it really has to do with what I term mindless consumerism. And I'm happy to go into that in more detail.
Well, I love this tagline. You have the happier, healthier, wealthier, more engaged, simply better. That's how you'll see your future by the end of this book, that's a pretty tall order. But I was so excited to see that. I was like, whoa, this is about healthcare and about our health as individuals in communities, in a country, and then globally. And I think you found some root causes here. So before we get into that root cause, I would like just a status of the stats. Like, let's just take an inventory of what you found. Like, we're living in this pandemic, and I told you I'll veer into that discussion. You stay on topic with the book. But it's interesting that the pre-existing conditions that are making people more susceptible to a virus and actually ultimately leading to negative consequences and sometimes death are the things that you've documented right out of the gate of these things are on the rise, not even close around other nations. So maybe speak into that a little bit.
Yeah, unfortunately, all these chronic diseases are actually increasing over time. Those things that I mentioned, whether it's diabetes or high blood pressure, colon cancer. In fact, you might be aware that we recently pushed the screening interval for colon cancer back to starting from age 45, where it had been from 50 onward, mainly because we're finding a higher disease burden at younger ages. And so what's also true is that, obesity rates are increasing. And so if you look in the US, if you look at the percentage of patients who are percent of adults who are either overweight or obese, that amounts to almost 72% of patients, of people.
That's
of adults.
Staggering.
That's a staggering number.
Yeah. Now, so that is 72%.
Yeah.
Overweight or obese.
Right, defined by a BMI of 25 or higher. Now, what you'll come to see is that, sadly, we in the U.S. are actually leading the world in terms of some of those chronic diseases, in terms of our chronic disease burden, which is what is making us, as Greg pointed to, more susceptible to complications of COVID, as for one thing. But really, the rest of the world is not doing that much better. I mean, in terms of over time, if you look at other developed countries, even chronic disease burden, even there is increasing over time, and so is rates of obesity, and so is medical costs.
So the other components, it's not even just the big killers, though. The components you said: major depressive disorder, insomnia, arthritis, Alzheimer's disease, ADD, colon cancer, anxiety, gout, inflammatory bowel disease, like it basically across the line. And you've got some graphs in there that you're right. It is a trend across the globe with the good old US of A leading the charge.
Mhm.
So then, okay, here, I'm going to lob it to you. So why is that happening?
Why
Is it
that
just
happening?
levels of toxicity happening? Is it just poor diet? We're just all sloths living on the couch eating potato chips.
So it really does come down to the foundational pillars of healthy diet, exercise, and sleep. So again, at an obvious level, that's pretty evident to anyone who, just is alive today, that we're just not as healthy in these foundational ways of living. But when you ask what's the underlying cause of that, people are surprised to learn that what I identify in the book is it's consumerism. It's a manner of living that ties us to a certain lifestyle. And let me explain how what I call mindless consumerism contributes to this unhealthy lifestyle that sets us up for chronic disease. Really, there's four major ways. Okay. So in the first place, it ties us to a certain unhealthy lifestyle of working. And so if you imagine most of our work, we tend to be, for the most part, tied to a desk from oftentimes 8 to 5 in front of a computer, and going to and from work. In addition to that 8 to 5, that commuting time is, first of all, very unhealthy because we're sedentary. Two, we're generally in a rush for breakfast and almost certainly for lunch. It's rare that we have time and energy to be able to prepare a good dinner when we come home. And so, really this our consumerism, this sense of this notion of mindless consumerism actually ties us to this certain lifestyle where we're tied to and dependent upon an employer for our day-to-day living. So that's the first way. The second way I identify in the book is that, through our pursuit of more and more that we buy, we actually take away opportunities for exercise. So in the sense that, for example, if you look at the healthiest communities in the world, and you ask some of those folks, what is it that makes you guys so healthy? And what you're surprised to hear is that they often don't seem to know. And the reason they don't seem to know is because it's actually built into their daily existence. So, for example, they may not have access to roads right off from their driveway, right? They may have to cycle somewhere or walk somewhere. Whereas for us, we have a garage. So as soon as I get out my door, I'm in the garage, I got access to the car, and then I drive to work and back, right? And so unfortunately, we've engineered out the need to use our legs. Okay, we've unfortunately engineered out the necessity of movement in a lot of ways. And again, I'm just kind of mentioning these here. I go into a lot more detail in the book. The third way is that much of our consumerism actually contributes to certain environmental toxins and environmental degradation that adversely affect us. It's obvious in the sense of CO2 emissions that contribute to climate change, and climate change itself is tied to a higher mortality rate, but also in terms of certain other pollutants that cause endocrine disruptors, such as microplastics, to be introduced into the environment that then adversely affect our endocrine systems. So that's kind of a third way identifying. And a fourth way is it's a little bit more complicated. And again, I'm going to reference to the book to really kind of get a good grasp of it. But because people who are, because we, unless we are mindful of our consumer habits, if we're mindless of that, we tend to overspend. And as a result, we never reach the point of being independent of our employer, which means that for the most part, most people end up working for money as opposed to for the product or service that they're trying to produce. This is different from, for example, Elon Musk. I don't think Elon Musk is working for more money. I could be wrong about that, but I think he actually has a passion for the product and service, and money is instead a side effect.
Mhm.
And so when you have the situation where you have people who are working for more money, you're actually kind of enticing them to produce something that is so addictive and so enticing. And in the sense of, when you look at the food industry, you can see a good example of this. You hook people onto processed foods that unfortunately are really inherently pretty unhealthy for us. And in all these different ways, I identify in the book as being things that adversely affect our health.
You did have a big component around real food versus synthetic food. And I'm
Yeah.
wondering if you could just dive into that example, because you have countless examples. I really want to encourage people to get the book, because as you're going to hear in a little bit, you have some solutions, really sound solutions. It's very hopeful and very, I mean, I'm a radical optimist at heart. And to see your book with actually clear prescription on how do we get ourselves out of it, how do we train our kids, how do we educate our families, and actually make these changes is spot on. So that we you know, those prescriptions are right in the book in clear detail. But let's get into in depth in a couple of these sections, because we're not going to give the punchline away.
Sure.
At least the exact how to, but this food versus synthetics, that's it, because there are so many layers in that discussion.
Yeah, I think the best summary of this is from a food journalist who I often tell my patients about. His name is Michael Pollan. You guys probably know of him. He wrote several books. But basically what he says is eat food, not too much, mostly plants. And in basically a sentence, you kind of summarize what's necessary for the general public to know about food. So in the first instance, eat food. Unfortunately, most of what's out there is not real food, right? And it's processed food. It's not food that somebody would recognize came from a farm somewhere. So for example, a Snickers bar. Did that come from a farm? Do you recognize that it's coming from a farm? Probably not.
Yeah.
You really have to, break it down. And even then you have to, add in a lot of processed chemicals and all that to get to a Snickers bar, right?
Right.
Unless you recognize it as ultimately having come from the earth, it's probably not real food, right? And so, I think he really, captures that very, very, really perfectly in that, in his little saying there.
One line sentence for
Yeah.
sure. But then you look at, we have food policies that are skewed to creating the synthetics. And I'm originally from Western Pennsylvania, Johnstown. It's coal and steel country,
Yeah.
The foothills of Appalachia. And I go back and it's like I go into the grocery store and I call it kind of a food desert. And no offense to anybody listening from Johnstown, but the quality or the options of food just are not the same that I have here in Portland, Oregon, let's say, where there's, live farmers markets every night of the week, and where we have the fresh food brought right into the city. So then the average person is like, well, okay, that's great, Dr. George, but like, I'm busy working. Like, I got to put the food on the table for my kids. I don't have a lot of time for food preparation. This is what was in the grocery store. So it's kind of, the deck is stacked against us a bit.
Unfortunately, it is. And what I propose in the book is that really there's a way out of this, right? And so for any individual who's looking to overcome this, it starts with kind of this focus on being mindful consumers. And what do I mean by that? Ultimately it translates to, once you have your basic needs met, that includes, food and water and shelter and security and, all the basics. Once you've had that met, then after that, the best things in life are actually free of cost for the most part. Okay, there's some caveats to that I talk about in the book, but for the most part, once we're past a certain level of consumption, which is healthy for us, then beyond that level, it starts to be increasingly unhealthy and increasingly adversely affecting our health. If we can take that that philosophy and apply it to our spending, okay, that the best things in life are in fact free, you would, and you could, and if you, in addition to that, apply some basic investing principles, which I also talk about, then you can fairly easily, for the majority of us, get to the point of being financially independent. That means you don't have to depend on anybody, including your employer, for your daily bills, for your daily needs.
So define what that is. What is financial independence? Because, these are topics that aren't even taught in finance school, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Sadly, I have, a personal finance person who I used to work with, and he said he doesn't have to. He's never been required to take this in his all his years of studying. So financial independence, basically, what it comes down to is being able to meet your daily expenses, whether you're working or not. And so, what I basically propose is that you can get to a point of being able to be independent of your employer, in the sense that if you stop working tomorrow, maybe you lost your job, or maybe you just decided you wanted to stop working for whatever reason, your income would last you the rest of your life. And you would never have to worry about making money through your employer. You wouldn't have to depend on your employer. And this frees you up in a lot of ways that I, again, reference in the book, that is much more conducive to healthier living. In the first place, you have a lot more time to be able to do some of the things that, Greg, you were mentioning, that is, prepare yourself a meal,
Right.
Instead of grabbing something on the go, which is perfectly understandable in the current situation, because we don't have enough time to, come home, take care of the kids, helping them with their homework, and then in addition to that, cook and, plus clean up. I mean, it's much more easier if we could just grab something on the go from McDonald's, right? And so, sadly, that's kind of where we are, but it doesn't have to be that way.
Okay, so you make it sound so easy. So I'm sure folks are like, okay, that sounds great. How do you do that? Now, you do lay that out in the book, but I'm wondering if you could give some examples of how do you get, so if you're not an entrepreneur, you're talking about you're living from interest from your investments. Yes.
Yeah, it's surprising to a lot of folks, but it's surprising only because this is kind of the way that the rest of society around us has been living. That is, that they work until an relatively old age, and then they finally retire with a lot of medical problems that unfortunately they are then left to deal with and not able to enjoy their retirement oftentimes. But what I propose is that really anybody, certainly from the middle class on up, but even I would say in the upper half of the lower class on up, can get to the point of being financially independent by just recognizing that, one, that the philosophy that the best things in life are free once you get past a certain point of meeting your basic needs, which is a big, an important
Piece.
Yes. And then secondly, by investing that largely in, we don't necessarily have to go into the details of how to invest it, but there's some very basic investment strategies that anyone can take advantage of. You don't need to be an entrepreneur. You could get, if you can save a good majority of your income from your current employer and invest that, and you should be able to do that if you really believe in this philosophy that I talk about, then you can, put away maybe 50, 70, 75% of your income and have that in investments that then lead to a reliable river of cash flow for you.
Yeah. Lovely. And so that is really a lot different. Like, I'm excited to share this with my teenage grads of high school and college age students to really get ahead of the curve, because if they start now with some of the principles that you line up, they're going to be way far ahead of the curve.
Well, they'll be retired before their parents.
Right.
Yeah.
That's for sure.
Yeah. And I do have to say that, I'm not necessarily a proponent of the retirement part of that. So I there's a reason for getting to the point of being financially independent. I don't necessarily then use, so that you could be retired as the incentive, right? It's because at that point you can actually be liberated to be able to do a lot of things that you can't because of the because you're oftentimes tied to a certain lifestyle because of how we're spending our money.
Sure, the time constraints of just trading your time for money, which is
Yes.
a majority of the folks in the United States and pretty much around the globe.
Yeah.
So that, I mean, that's very refreshing to hear. And this component of, I love it that you've tied consumerism
Mhm.
as the underlying root issue
Mhm.
that has led to a lot of these policies. Now, how can any person escape this toxic mix of factors that push us towards the unhealthy living? But besides this mindful consumption, which maybe you'll give us some ideas on how to be more mindful. And, you know, I think a lot of folks are like, well, I can't put away 75% of my income. I spend it. Like, I think the stats, do you know the stats on living paycheck to paycheck in the United States right now?
I don't. I know the vast majority of folks, unfortunately, have to rely on, you know, it's almost like as soon as you stop working, you're out of money, right? And so,
Right.
Sadly, that's the situation a lot of us find ourselves in.
Right.
But you know, it basically comes down to if you can again kind of recognize where you're at, stop and take a look and see. Actually, there may be many things right now that, if you think about it, really don't seem to impact happiness. And so, what I get to in the book is this discussion of how we tend to get to confusing this pursuit of happiness, which is really what we inherently want. What every person inherently tries to go for is to be happier and to improve their sense of well-being. But we, by nature, you know, by human nature, we tend to conflate pleasure with happiness. And there's actually nothing wrong with pleasure, and there's actually a lot of benefit in pleasure. But when you're mistaking pleasure for happiness, that's what gets us into all sorts of problems. And as a result, we tend to overspend, thinking that that's going to bring us happiness. And I cite a lot of research in the book that says that a lot of these things that we spend money on, a lot of these material goods, for example, they're susceptible to what academics term hedonic adaptation, which is that, you know, as soon as you get it, you know, within a few, you know, a period of time from after you get that, you're no longer, you know, it doesn't really excite you anymore. And so you really didn't increase your happiness from the pursuit of that pleasurable, you know, good or service.
Interesting. So that component, I love that. So you're saying really the consumerism drive is really trying to buy our way, like money can't buy me love, the famous Beatles song, right? Like that component around the more money, because you do lay that out in the book where the gross domestic product, while it's gone up, the levels of happiness have not gone up commensurately.
Yeah, you know, sadly, right now, you know, if you look at the subtitle of the book, it says I don't know if you guys notice, but it says a doctor's prescription for living beyond diet and exercise. What it doesn't say it's a politician's prescription for a living or an economist's prescription for living, which I think, unfortunately, is how we are as a society pursuing our growth right now. And so if you look at this, right now, you know, progress is measured by increase in GDP. And so whether you're talking to politicians on the right or politicians on the left, you know, on the right, the overarching goal seems to be increasing GDP, whereas on the left, it's also increasing GDP, maybe doing it a little bit more equitably. But regardless, the goal is increasing GDP. And what I get to in the book is that, you know, really GDP was never our goal. It was always happiness and well-being. And so, you know, if you're getting your prescription from an economist, I think the pursuit of more, you know, higher GDP growth is kind of unfortunately where this is going to lead us. And this is how, because we tend to conflate pleasure for happiness, we tend to lose focus of our ultimate goal, which is happiness, and instead pursue greater income on an individual basis or GDP on a collective basis.
So let's talk about that, the happiness quotient of actually putting that down on the bottom line, like measuring happiness, because this could be a foreign concept for a lot of folks. Like, what are you talking about happiness? Like, I don't have time for that. Like, I've got to, I'm running around, I'm on the mill, I'm producing, I want to go faster, quicker, to get the cash in the bank, to hit the finish line so I can retire. I love how you flip it around. One of my favorite quotes is, design a life that you don't want to retire from, that you want to continue living. Like the pursuit of happiness, of like, what is a life well lived? Like, that is an amazing question.
Yeah.
And I love that you have that, like, that's in the prescription.
Yeah, so, you have to start with that, right? I mean, everything kind of is, that it really is the ultimate end goal for us, is to increase our well-being, our happiness. And that's true whether you're looking at it from a religious perspective or from a scientific perspective. And I talk about, religious leaders who have kind of pointed to that in the book as well. But basically, what we know from the research is that there's a certain commonality among the factors that tend to increase our happiness. Again, once our basic needs are met. And those have to do with things that engage the body or mind or soul in some way, right? So for example, things like good sleep, which actually is good for your body, is something that does increase your happiness. And studies back that up. Good social interaction, which is, again, something that is nourishing for our souls, is something that increases happiness. So whether you're talking about, another example, intellectual pursuits, which again, kind of nourish our mind or engage our mind, those kinds of things actually increase happiness. Instead, we tend to chase after things that are pleasurable, and we lose sight of the fact that we're actually looking to things that will make us more happy when it actually doesn't.
So what are some of, you call them the soul satisfying pursuits? So, you've tied in here the blue zones, which are this 7 areas of the globe that there's more higher quotient of centenarians, those that live over 100, with a good happiness scale. Like, that's part of the discussion. You also, you talk about some other factors that you're looking at there too. So what would you put in, like, on, when we're looking at the balance sheet of our lives, in some of these, and where you said, like, most of these things are free, what are we talking about?
We're talking about things that, again, satisfy the body, mind, or soul, right? And so for example, setting a goal for yourself and pursuing that goal, and achieving that sort of goal, that is something that is takes a lot of hard work. It doesn't necessarily take a lot of expensive, things that you have to buy, right? That could be something that increases happiness. It's those social interactions, as I mentioned, with spending time with family and friends, nourishing the body with healthy foods, good, having good health itself. You mentioned Dan Buettner and the studies he's done on longevity, and he's also done some studies on happiness. And one of the things he finds is that health is one of the biggest factors that affect happiness. And so if you're not getting good sleep, good exercise, good diet, I mean, you're not going to be optimal. You're not going to live as optimally as you could have.
Right. So that health component. And then you talked about having, I mean, there's this, I think the Japanese have a concept for it of, like, sense of purpose, right? That component of, I've been really interested in studying longevity and this concept of what is a life worth living. And I found the path of service early on in my life. So the giving and serving others, that has served me beyond belief. It's such pleasure and open-heartedness, etc. But not everybody shares that value, or that doesn't resonate with them. But there are things, being in the company of family and friends, having a spiritual awareness of something bigger. I think why we're seeing psychedelics on the rise. We just legalized that in Oregon coming up is, psilocybin assisted psychotherapy. And Michael Pollan, who wrote All About Food, also How to Change Your Brain, showed it's like one of the top 5 events for most people that have done those things, because it lifts that veil and shows like there's such an interconnection here.
What you'll notice also among those various factors that really do engage the body, mind, or soul is that really they are free of cost. Once again, your basic needs are met. And so if you really embrace that philosophy, then that gets you to the next point, which is that, you really can put away, as you mentioned, who can put away 50, 70% of your income? Well, you really can do that if you really understand and embrace that philosophy.
Nice. That is lovely. Without the health, I love that you put that as the foundational component, because, as being in clinical practice 21 years, it's when you don't have your health, nothing else matters. You can't take the toys, you can't take the luxury yacht, you can't take the house in the Berkshires with you. It's, how do I get my energy back? How do I feel better? How do I get my brain working again? And so those aspects, really, I mean, I'm not sure if you have that in the book, a prescription on how do we layer those in for ourselves, our families, our children, and then communities at large, and then really the institutions, because you're right, the GDP, gross domestic product, is just a dollar amount, but it's not sustainable, right? Like they don't have a dollar amount for lost trees or toxic water or, reefs dying. And so it's not we're not playing the right game with the economics, right?
Yeah, we've kind of lost focus in terms of what we're really after, right? And so, the higher, this pursuit of endless GDP growth is really starting to have some toxic effects, obviously for the environment, which, some have pointed out. But in this case, I'm kind of mentioning that there really is an adverse effect on our health as well.
Yeah.
And so that's kind of the focus of this, that when we have this pursuit that's gone wrong, how it's sort of consuming us, as in a fire, kind of and causing us to adversely affect our health, right?
Right. I always grew up, I studied environmental science as an undergrad, and I always thought we should have a bumper sticker that says "Save the humans," right? Rather than "Save the whales." Because it really is, we're really pushing ourselves to that brink and not really even understanding, we're unconscious to it. So what are the techniques that you recommend for folks to get more conscious in their consumerism? I think you laid out a few, but I want to just revisit that to make that clear for folks.
Yeah, so a lot of it comes from just kind of recognizing what it is that really impact happiness. And so once you have those things, once you've identified those things, there's a short list of things that actually impact happiness, surprisingly short. But once you've identified those things, then pursuing those things means that you'll have way more room to be able to spend and invest that money, right? And so I guess one of the things that I point to is that we tend to be we tend to unfortunately have this experience that after getting something pleasurable, we feel a little excited about it, which is great, but we forget that shortly after, maybe it's a few days after or shorter, more likely, that we are just back to our baseline, right? Back to our baseline way of living. And so unfortunately, the next time we want to spend on that next upgrade, we forget about that previous experience. And as a result, it's kind of an endless kind of pursuit that we're caught up in.
Got it. So we're chasing after dragons that they don't satisfy us.
Yeah. And in some sense, we can't be entirely blamed for it, because this is how we grew up, right? And from a young age onward, we're taught that that consumerism and this mindless consumerism sort of thing is almost a good thing. You might remember back in 1987, the movie Wall Street came out, and Gordon Gekko gets up there and says greed is good. And so
Right.
and so we have this sense that that greed is actually good for our economy. And if GDP growth is what we're after, then maybe it is good. But I make the case in the book, and I think it is a compelling case, that it really isn't GDP growth that we're after. We're really after improving the well-being of our collective well-being and our collective sense of happiness.
So what are some of the things you gave some examples of what makes us unhappy, and one of the things that really stood out for me was on comparisons, because it is kind of a human thing that, keeping up with the Joneses type of deal.
Yeah.
And I think you even wrote about a study that was done. I think they asked people, if you were making $100,000 or $50,000 and everybody else was making 25,000 versus you were making 100,000 and everybody else was making 200,000. You remember that one in there?
I do. Yeah. Most people opt for the lower income where they're doing better than their peers. And the point is that we, by nature, tend to compare ourselves and derive some degree of happiness from our comparison and where we stand with relation to our peers. And this gets us into all sorts of trouble if we're not mindful of it, because we are then we tend to try to keep up with the Joneses as a result. And so it's not necessarily as obvious as some people think. I mean, a lot of people think when they hear the term keeping up with the Joneses that we're actively competing against our neighbors to get the latest, and it actually doesn't work that way. Most people are not necessarily envious of their neighbor when they have a nice car, or some folks are happy with their are right to even congratulate them, and so it's not really that sort of an obvious level. I talk about it in the book, but Adam Smith had the foresight to recognize that this sort of thing is likely to happen because of how certain cultural expectations and societal norms start to develop. And so in his time, I think it was a certain type of linen shirt or some sort of leather shoe or something that he cited that no even I guess laborer at that time that no one would think to do without, right? And so in the book, I kind of cite the example of forks and spoons. Right now we use forks and spoons where, and I'm not necessarily advocating that everybody get rid of their forks and spoons, but it's something that we don't necessarily, it's something that we don't necessarily need. Our hands actually do a pretty good job of bringing food from the plate to our mouths. But because of the way cultural expectations have taken hold in societal norms, we've just kind of accepted that that's kind of where, that's just what's normal.
What we do, right?
What a decent person would do. Now,
again, unconscious behavior.
Yes, right? It's an unconscious behavior. And if you take this out and extend this line of reasoning, you get to a better understanding of how people tend to get into this trap of having to keep up with the Joneses.
Got it. Are you bringing back sporks?
What's that?
Are you going to bring back the sporks, the spoon sporks. And the fork in one?
I see. I have to think about that one. No, maybe not. I think I'm going to stick with the fork and spoon separate.
Yes, I couldn't contain this. I'm sorry. So how about as society as a whole, how can we get out of the toxic mix of factors by implementing a few sensible policies you're talking about? Because it's one for us to get conscious on our consumerism, but then there are some, invisible hands of the economy that aren't so invisible when you start going underneath to say, well, actually, these are subsidized.
Yeah, you're right. So for any individual, you can get out of this toxic mix of factors just by, being mindful of what you're consuming, and then again, using the money you save and investing it, right? So that's applicable for any individual. But really, there's a way for society to do this as a whole. So this is where, I'd really like to get us to, to be able to focus on is that there's certain policy interventions that I think right now we sort of are pushing consumerism and this mindless consumerism is a good thing. And yet we don't necessarily have to do that. So that starts one with, educating our kids to be mindful of what they're spending, of how they're spending money. And in part, that also means, implementing policies that are cautious about how we advertise to kids. And this is really important. I want to talk about this a bit because, our children are watching thousands of commercials, and not just commercials, but it's advertising hidden in everyday living, billboards. It could be in the sports stadiums, and all of those advertisements, a lot of those food advertisements, about 80% of those food advertisements are advertising unhealthy foods, pizzas, hamburgers, French fries, all those kinds of things that are processed and not good for us, right? And when we have our children who are much more easily manipulated because they haven't really fully developed that prefrontal lobe, that prefrontal cortex, and we allow the enriching of these industrial food businesses to take advantage of our children like that, it actually, we're actually rewarding these big food companies by allowing them to advertise to our children. And the problem is when our children kind of adopt this as normal because that's what they see around them, then they develop these habits early on that down the road, it's very hard for them. Once you have a child who's obese, it's much more difficult to intervene to where they're not going to continue to live to an unhealthy lifestyle as an adult.
Boy,
if you can intervene,
big deal, especially as we're looking at, when we're talking about AI coming on board and some of the research that I've seen where, kind of the millennials are trusting the device more than a peer or a professional in their life for coming up with the right solution. That's something to watch out.
Yeah, it's shocking and it's sad in a lot of ways.
We're programming early, huh?
Yeah. It's really sad because we're allowing these big food companies to profit off of our children, and it's just not right because again, once they're hooked onto some of these products, it's very hard for them, and you kind of set them up in a way that is much more likely to lead to an unhealthy adult lifestyle as well down the road.
Wow. Yeah, I hadn't really put that together so much. And that's, so you make the claim. So I want to go back to kind of the tagline here in the book. You say, we're going to, where did it go? I put it on the other page here. Boop. You've got it saying, happier, healthier, wealthier, more engaged, simply better. Yeah. That's how you'll see your future by the end of this book. So I want to get back to this statement, and this will kind of take us to the close here in the last couple minutes. Say you make the claim, overcoming mindless consumerism is not just a way out for our society to live healthier, but that it is the only way out. Yeah. And so why so? I mean, you've given compelling evidence, and it is a different take on, of course, the basics for health. You are Absolutely. There. They've got to be there. And then you've layered this extra piece on, which I do think is this happiness quotient and financial freedom. Like when you look at Stanford's research on longevity, they wound up with the financial solvency of the individual as being the primary issue for longevity. So you are right in line with like the cutting edge research with this. Yeah.
Yeah, great question. I think you're asking me what why is it that, this is not just a way out of our chronic disease burden that we're facing as a society, but in fact, the only way. And what I'd say to that is that, you can come up with other policy interventions, and I talk about some of those in the book, and I encourage you guys to read the book to be able to look through that. But one of the arguments which I hear commonly, I'll kind of discuss in a little bit more detail, which is that, with time, with technological advancement, it's just a matter of time that we're going to be able to be healthier as a population. And I'll say, I'll differentiate. I'll kind of tell you that there is chronic disease, and then there's health and well-being. And in terms of chronic disease, I don't doubt the power of technology. I don't doubt the power of science to be able to solve this problem for us. There's no question. Over time, we're going to be able to cure diabetes and Alzheimer's and cancer and things that we couldn't even imagine is curable in our day. We're going to be able to do that. But if you're telling me that that's going to lead us to be able to live healthier and with a better sense of well-being, here's why we cannot just rely on technology. In fact, the things that we need to be healthy are those foundational pillars that we talked about earlier: healthy diet, exercise, good sleep, and managing stress. Okay. And so if you think about it, all these things are already free. We actually don't need a new technological advancement to be able to get us to be able to eat healthier. We actually have food that is healthy for us already. Any improvement on food, it's only going to make it more unhealthy. It's actually going to be more processed and therefore unhealthier for us. The thing that we need for exercise is just to be able to be free enough to be able to get up and move. If we're tied down to our employer and going to be, we're going to cure chronic disease, but only to be more sedentary and tied to our desk from 8 to 5 plus, the commuting time, that's not going to lead to a healthier life. Same thing with sleep. You cannot invent a technological solution. Sleep is already perfect for us. All these things, healthy diet, exercise, sleep, they're already perfect for us as it is. So unless we are able to overcome this lifestyle, which is driven by our, unfortunately, mindless consumerism, there's not another way beyond to a healthier way of living.
All right, there it is, folks. I want to direct everybody to healthinflames.com is the website where to get the book. It is an amazing read. I'm halfway through the book, but I did read the PDF, and it's well worth it. And it's got a play-by-play manual here. I liked you actually, just a quick moment on, you wrote it with an educational component with quizzes and kind of with the latest educational tools of quizzing afterwards. And then I like how you suggest come back later and quiz yourself and see if you got it. That way the concepts stick, because it is a different way of thinking. It's a newer way, even though it's an ancient way. I mean, some of the books that you quote in there they're old, right? The financial principles have been pretty stable and well put. It's just they're not taught anymore.
Right.
And so healthinflames.com. Any last parting messages for our viewers and listeners of What the Health?
No, I really appreciate the chance to come on your show, Greg. I really love the questions. You had a lot of good questions, and we had a good, thoughtful discussion. So I love that. Yes. I do want to invite our listeners to really, 3 things. One, if you can get the book, read the book for yourself. 2, please write a review if you could. That increases the visibility of the book. And 3, I'm looking for a few folks to really join me and to get to this higher level of commitment where we can implement some of these things society-wide. And I talk about, 4 specific policies in the book that I think have the potential to be able to benefit not just an individual, but I think society as a whole. And that's really where I want to take this to the next level.
I love it. That is the mission and why I created this platform, What the Health. So you all, if you like the show, please think of 2 people to share it with and get the book. I'm going to share it actually. So Serendipity has it I am partnering up with some other folks in another community, and it was around how do we master this financial intelligence of, saving our money, making the money, and growing the money in energy. So in a conscious fashion. And so this was well timed, like what a gift for my inbox and to be able. So I'm going to share this with my reading group. Awesome. And, we're going to pass it around and get a discussion going. So I love it. Folks, if you like the show, give us a 5-star review. We are here on the Contact Talk radios on Tuesdays from 2 to 3 p.m. Pacific time. So we will see you next week. Thanks for tuning in.
Thank you so much, y'all.
And you're clear. Oops.